QuaranJazz. Listen while you're home. Hello and welcome to the 16th episode of QuaranJazz, your weekly update on what jazz musicians from all around the world are doing during the social distancing time. Yep, 16 and counting, my dear listener. I'm Geisa Fernandes, directly from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I'm a singer and songwriter, and you can learn more about my work by visiting my website, geisafernandes.com. The link will be in the description of this episode. QuaranJazz is also a proud participant of the Social Distancing Festival. If you don't know yet about this amazing action, the link will also be in the description of this episode, as well as the link to my mailing list, which is the quickest way to contact me. But you can also find me on Facebook. I've created and manage a discussion group on jazz festivals that accept submissions directly from independent artists. So if this is your case, if you don't have a manager and would like to know more about the jazz festival scenario, join the discussion. The name of the group is The Touring Jazz Musician, and you can find us on Facebook. And this week as my guest, I have New York upstate-born, Barcelona-based drummer Robert Castelli. Well, Castelli is much more than that. He's also a guitarist, and his sound has been described as funky, with solid grooves, energetic, exciting. Well, I think you got the idea. There's quite a portfolio. So, hi, Robert. So nice having you here. Thank you very much for your participation. As I usually do with my guests, I will ask you to start by telling us more about your background and how would you describe the music that you do. Well, I read a few descriptions about it while introducing you, but I would like to know your version of the story, so to speak.
Yeah, so my name is Robert Castelli. I'm a drummer. Guitar is my second instrument, and I'm a band leader, but I am primarily a drummer. I am the son, nephew, and grandson of drummers. My grandfather was a drummer, but he didn't play professionally. Well, and let's see, my father was one generation older than I. He got married late, I think because he was a musician, traveling. He got married in his 40s, and I wasn't born until he was like 45. And around that time, he got his first day job. The rest of the time, he was just a musician. But anyway, one of my father's brothers, my Uncle Joe, had a band, sort of semi-professionally. But my father and my Uncle Jimmy, who was my father's youngest brother, 2 years younger, were both active pros in New York during, kind of like the big band era. Probably, I've seen pictures of my father in the band from the 1930s, but my father, so I guess you could say he was active as a professional from that time, but he was very young then. So my uncle and my father were probably active for close to 40 years, 30 or 40 years, probably from like the 40s or 50s through the 80s. So my father was still gigging when I was a kid. So my early memories are my father either setting up his drums, packing the drums, cleaning the drums. He didn't play a lot in the house. He brushed up his brush technique and maybe messed around on the pad. I think my mother didn't want to deal with the noise, although I changed that later. So I used to carry my dad's stuff. I was really young. I was probably like 6 or 8. And I can remember, because I have an older brother and a younger brother, my mother used to wake me up she didn't want to drive alone at like 2 o'clock in the morning to pick up my dad from the gig. My dad had a regular gig in a hotel, in a trio, with a guy who was openly bisexual in the 70s. My mother hated him. And the guy went on to be a lover and protege of Liberace. It's actually in the film Candelabra, with Michael Douglas and Matt Damon. Actually, I haven't seen the film. And they changed the guy's name in the film. His original name is Vince Cardell, but I'll have to get back to you on the name of the character. But anyway, my father was playing every weekend, so he would come home, and because it was 2 o'clock in the morning, normally he would put his drums in a storage area behind the closet in my room, but he couldn't do that at 2 o'clock in the morning without waking me up, and my brother. My brother and I shared a room. So he would just dump the drums in the middle of the room, and I'd wake up, and there would be the drums lying on the floor. In cases, but they had different kind of cases back then. So the hi-hat was not in a case like today. He didn't fold it up or anything. My father just folded up the legs and laid it down on the floor with the cymbals attached. So I used to just like, when I was tall enough, I would pull it up and play that, you know. And gradually my father taught me, when he saw that I had an interest, because I started playing drums when I was 8 years old. I was self-taught until I was 16 years old. During that time, I wore out the grooves in all of my Hendrix and Beatles records. Mitch Mitchell was probably the biggest influence on me at the time, but of course I paid attention to any drummer that I heard, anyone at all. But Mitch Mitchell had jazz chops. So, yeah, anyway, I started studying music formally when I was 16 years old. In high school, I took theory and then in university, I started studying piano, guitar, orchestra, percussion, music theory, and composition. I had great teachers on the drums. I studied with the great Ed Sof, but before that, I studied privately with a friend of my father's named Tom Search. Search was his stage name. But my first teacher was Kim Plainfield at Drummers Collective. Because I couldn't afford to go away to university, I used to commute to school. And this was before I even went to college. I started studying with Kim. And then I had about a year and a half with Kim. And then I went to university and ended up studying with Ed Sof, who's one of the best. I'm lucky me, I had no idea who he is, and he's like one of the greatest teachers in the history of the instrument, and has influenced and taught many drummers. Like his most famous later student is Keith Carlock, but he's taught Dave Weckl and all kinds of people. I also had the good fortune of meeting and studying with Gary Chester, who I found out was a boyhood friend of my father. Anyway, I could go on and on about my father and drumming, but about the time I was 14, I started playing. My brother had a guitar, and I used to take his guitar and try to learn basic chords. And then my father was working at G. Schirmer's, was originally a music publishing house, and they grew into a record store, instrument store, and sheet music. So my father could bring home, that's how I started my record collection. Any record I wanted, my father would bring home. I got my first guitar that way, although my father bought a drum set from a local person when I was 10. Yeah, I started playing when I was 8 on his drums, and I got my first drum set when I was 10. But my father taught me, he came from a time where he said drums were meant to be felt, not heard. So, yeah, drumming is, people say, what are you? Are you a drummer? No, I am a musician who plays the drums.
Wow, that's a very interesting sentence, and I think it applies to all other categories. I immediately posed the question myself. So, are you a musician that sings or a singer? Lauren Bush also raised this question or this reflection, let's say, during her interview. Guess that's the kind of question that pops up from time to time in our minds. And it's also good, so I think we should think about it. But say, Robert, and what about your references? I would like to know a little bit more about your musical references.
Yeah, as far as the music that I write, my studies were interrupted my father being a musician, my father also was visually handicapped. He was not blind, but he was almost blind, and he could never drive a car or anything like that. So we were extremely poor when I was growing up. We lived in a house, but my father's family helped him get the house, so I didn't know any of these things until I was much older. But anyway, because I was poor, I never got to finish my studies. So, because I had to work, it was either feed and clothe yourself or go to music school and wonder how much money you'll make. So I did study, though. I studied for I studied music since I was 16 years old, in privately, and then I studied in high school. I started, as I said, music theory. Anyway, the music that I write, it's been described as a feast of styles, from world music to tasteful brushwork. That's what one of the drum magazines in Britain said. But you could say jazz, funk, and world music, but basically that just comes down to contemporary jazz. Some people say fusion. I mean, some of my stuff is highly electric, which I like, but it swings and has elements of ethnic rhythms like Brazilian, African, Latin. Yeah, but I think of music as compositionally, I think is more orchestrally. Like, in fact, I wanted to study film scoring, and I was heavily influenced by composers like Henry Mancini, Elmer Bernstein, Bernard Herrmann, and later Jerry Goldsmith, Thomas Newman, now Hans Zimmer, people like that. I love film music. And when I was growing up, one time, I think in the 90s, I heard sometime in the early 2000s, I heard a radio interview with Jaco Pastorius on BBC Radio, and the reason I'd never heard it in the States is because we didn't get BBC back then. So Jaco talked about, he said, "You want to hear some of the best music in the world right now?" He said, "Listen to American television themes and film scores." And that is exactly right. So all that time I spent in front of the TV, even watching Bugs Bunny, the music stood out at me, and that's the way I conceptualize music and even drumming. And throughout my life, people have, how should I say, commented on my drumming, saying that I play very musically. So I get that from my father, because my father said drums are meant to be felt, not heard. So if you're a good musician, if you're a good drummer, you're like the best character actor in the world. You can go into any role and be believable as if that were you. And that's the way I look at all music, not just drumming. So anyway, I've been a band leader since 2005. The rest of the time I was a sideman, and I play all kinds of music. People ask me, what kind of music do you play? And I basically say, is there more than one kind? So I've done 2 CDs. I just finished a third right before the lockdown. So one was a saxophone-less quartet. Normally my boom quartet is guitar, saxophone, electric bass, or acoustic bass, and drums. And I had gotten a regular gig at a club here in Barcelona after trying very hard, and it was a concept gig called New York Nights, where the bass player and I were from New York, and the idea was just to get one really well-known person on the scene, like a senior person, if you will. And Barcelona has a lot of really talented young musicians, and I wanted to get one of the up-and-coming badasses, And it was supposed to be a concept night, and then the things fell through with the bass player, and then the club was having management problems, and they changed their management 3 times in 3 months, and what turned out to be New York Nights as a concept night evolved into a band of the same four guys. A guitar player from Argentina, an amazing guitar player named Donny Pettis, who's been in Barcelona a very long time, and he's a professor at one of the best schools here. A great talented, younger, but not so young, Swiss-French keyboardist named Gilles Estorpet, and a young bass player from the Canary Islands named Emilio Martin. Jamboree recorded our show January 29th of this year, and they were going to release it on all of the platforms and print CDs because they have a record label called QuaranJazz and recorded live at Jamboree. So I was like honored and flattered that they offered to do that for me, and I was already planning to record my Boom project. And what happened is, because of money and things, I decided to record with the New York Knights band. So anyway, that's one of the projects that I was involved in before the lockdown. But I've been playing. I had a regular opening session with an organ trio, which hopefully is going to start again at the end of the month. I had 2 regular piano trio projects. I'm involved in a pop band called Night Train Band. You know, we play all the pop hits and play hotels and weddings and that kind of thing, like musicians do. Yeah, so I had, I don't know, 4 or 5 running projects before the lockdown.
I see. I understand. Yeah, and talking about lockdown, what did you do during this phase? And how is the back to normal procedures? I understand that Spain has this different phases of thing. In which phase are you in Barcelona?
So yeah, the lockdown is just lifting here in Barcelona. Gigging is just starting. They only started 2 weeks ago, I believe, or a week and a half ago. And it's very limited space, only 3 to 4 musicians on stage. Some clubs, depending on the size, only 30 people in the audience. Yeah, we're just coming out of lockdown, but Barcelona and Madrid are in what's called phase 2, where the rest of Spain is in phase 3. So the rest of Spain is like 75% back to normal or more. Yeah, less than 100%, but more than 70. And phase 2 is between 50, is more like 50 or 60. I just got a confirmation for New York Nights for July. So looks like that's going to go back up and running. I don't know if that's going to be a regular thing like it was, but we have a gig. So the important point is we're coming out of lockdown and gigs are starting again. Yeah, while I was in lockdown, I really couldn't do a whole lot. I played on the pad, you know, practice on the pad, and I tried to write new music on the guitar. Unfortunately, I write most of my music from the guitar, which sucks for horn players, because most of the stuff is in guitar keys. And I never developed my piano. When I was studying piano in school, we didn't have a piano. And this was actually before the Casio keyboard, if you can believe that. And yes, I'm almost that old. So I never developed my piano skills, and that, you know, so I think my composition is lacking because of that. But anyway, there's still time. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to going back to playing regularly.
And about the track you've selected for us, what can you tell us about it?
The music that you're going to hear is from my first CD, so it's older. It's probably 10 years or more old. The song is called Lumps for Humpty. It's a funk thing in 5. And the CD got reviewed in many different countries, in actually 6 countries. I was very proactive in sending it out. And John Kellman, who writes for All About Jazz, also writes for Abstract Logics, and Abstract Logics asked John to do it. And the weird thing is a journalist and drummer in Canada, I think in Montreal. His name is T. Bruce Whittet, and he had reviewed my CD, and he was going to pass it to John to review in All About Jazz, but Sivak Dutta, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but the proprietor of Abstract Logics asked John to review the CD. So Abstract Logics, John reviewed the CD under Abstract Logics, not under All About Jazz, and he described it as Brecker Brothers type. He said the fusion bands of the 70s either couldn't groove or wouldn't groove. So being a drummer, my music has a very rhythmic aspect to it. But anyway, this is a funk thing in 5. It's called Lumps for Humpty, and I got the title because I had an old Ghanaian girlfriend who used to say, "Oh, the way your head is big, you're like Humpty Dumpty." And I wrote the tune when life was really being unpleasant. I went through a couple of unpleasant periods due to deaths and whatever. So, yeah. So, Lumps for Humpty.
Oh, yeah, hard times. We can all relate to that. And not only right now, but especially right now, we can all relate to that. But it's good that you can laugh while you're talking about those times. And that's one of the wonderful things that being a musician is about, turning this bad moment into beautiful things. So thank you very much for sharing this experience with us. This shared intimacy is what makes this show so special. Thank you very much for that. And muito obrigada to you, my dear listener, who stayed with us up to now. This was the 16th episode of QuaranJazz. I'm Geisa Fernandes, singer, songwriter, and music researcher from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. If you want to know more about my music, other podcasts, and projects I'm involved, visit my webpage, geisafernandes.com. You will find the link to it in the description of this episode, as well as a link to my mailing list, a quicker way to contact me. And last but not least, if you are a jazz musician and would like to know more about jazz festivals that accept submissions directly from artists, I would strongly recommend you to join the Facebook group, The Touring Jazz Musician. You can also drop me a line there. Till next week, and now, ladies and gents, Lumps for Humpty. QuaranJazz. Listen while you're home. QuaranJazz, a podcast by Geisa Fernandes.